house looks just like the one next to it. And the one next to that. A young couple live in it.
You're so obnoxious.
With their 3 children. And something more.
Hello? They're here.
You know, for as iconic a movie as Poltergeist is, I'm not sure it gets the credit it deserves for being so deeply influential. The film not only inspired dozens of spoofs and pop culture references, but also had a profound impact on dozens of movies to follow. Films like The Sixth Sense and The Ring drew a lot from Tobe Hooper's blending of domestic drama and supernatural horror. If nothing else, I'm sure James Wan is glad this movie exists. His Conjuring and especially Insidious movies border on being remakes of Poltergeist.
Poltergeist are usually associated with an individual. Hauntings seem to be connected with an area.
It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
Even the Paranormal Activity movies, though told through a very different style, continue the tradition of supernatural hauntings in American suburbs. And that's to say nothing of the official remakes. 2015 brought a deeply forgettable Poltergeist remake, and apparently another is in development, currently set to be directed by the Russo brothers of all people. Oh, and there were also 2 direct sequels to the original in the 1980s, which were also fairly successful financially, if not critically. Poltergeist is clearly a seminal movie, and if I had to sum up its importance to a single point, it would be that the film brought the haunted house movie into present-day America. Before Poltergeist, haunted house movies in the West drew from the Victorian Gothic. Movies like The Innocents were set at the turn of the 20th century, and brought with it the elegant costumes and art direction one expects from prestige period pieces. Even when a haunted house movie was ostensibly set in the present, the haunted house in question was still an ancient mansion evoking a distant past. This tradition is alive and well in something like Netflix's The Haunting of Hill House, the 4th adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel, modernizing the characters, while Hill House itself remains a gothic vision of the past. Even as haunted house movies moved more comfortably into the present, the legacy of the gothic ghost story lingered. We can use The Exorcist as an example. Though technically not a haunted house movie, the film is about a haunting of sorts, and its story of a mother fighting to save her child, besieged by the supernatural, is a clear influence on Poltergeist. Friedkin's film is quite clearly set in the 70s. This is all over the fashion and style of the characters and the technology used. There's even an extended sequence where Chris tries to use modern medicine to save Regan, and it's one of the most frightening aspects of the whole film. But for all the film's contemporaneous elements, the house itself has the same austere quality as so many Gothic mansions. It is a cold, alienating place, not far removed from something like The Haunting. A similar argument can be made of the Amityville Horror, whose house is not only old, but isolated in the countryside. Poltergeist breaks this mold by clearly situating its haunted house within an ideal American suburb. The Freeling home is not a singular mansion, but one of dozens of houses barely distinct from those surrounding it. And inside, the family status is not denoted through elegant architecture, but through products. Movie posters, toys, and a television set. Success in 1980s America is marked by the acquisition of products, and it is through these products that the vengeful spirits first attack. The frustration of having your stuff meddled with, introduced in the opening as neighbors mess with each other's TV signals, evolves into the full-blown terror of having your hard-earned products distorted and destroyed. The clown doll is not just effective because it looks creepy, but because it is a twisted perversion of a product meant to provide comfort. When Carol Ann is taken to the other side, the mocking laughter of the spirits is embodied by a toy robot, and yet another example of property turned against its owners. And of course, it is significant that the most ominous contact with the spirits is through the television, a product so integral to the American family that it literally transformed the shape of American households. The long-standing fear that television might transmit harmful material into the home finds a very literal manifestation in Poltergeist. The film expands on the fear of one's products being distorted and destroyed by linking the acquisition of goods to a specifically American cultural context. The film opens with a television broadcast of the national anthem, suggesting a link between the product and national identity, while more broadly establishing a politically minded subject matter. Later on, Steve Freeling reads a biography of Ronald Reagan, a significant prop given Reagan's deregulation of the economy and lowering of taxes in the early 80s helped expand the wealth of the upper middle class and contributed to an increase in consumer spending. Man, a lot of Reagans in this video. Now, it was about at this point in the original script that I connected the theme of American consumerism in Poltergeist to the fact that the Freeling home is built on an Indian burial ground. I was going to talk about how the house and its products become a symbol for the American dream, built atop the bones of indigenous peoples, how Steve Freeling unknowingly helps facilitate indigenous erasure by selling the land, and how only when their home built upon genocide is destroyed are the Freelings truly freed. Solid stuff. Just one problem. There is no Indian burial ground in Poltergeist. We all remember Poltergeist as the ghost movie with the Indian burial ground, but the film goes out of its way to clarify that it's actually just a plain old cemetery. Now, I was unnerved when I learned this, partially because it meant I was going to need to do a rewrite, but also because I wanted to know why this misconception has endured for so long. Why do we all remember an Indian burial ground that isn't there? One such reason might be the film's proximity to other horror stories that actually use the trope, like the Amityville Horror and Pet Sematary, or the fact that future parodies of Poltergeist have helped spread the misconception. But on another level, the notion of an Indian burial ground relates to the core themes of Poltergeist quite well. Writer Terri argues one such reason for the trope's brief prominence in the late 1970s and 80s corresponded to a growing sense of guilt within white America for the genocide of indigenous peoples. The Indian burial ground represents the fear that such crimes will come back to haunt the country. Consider how well this fear grafts onto Poltergeist, a movie about the symbols of the American dream turning against the nuclear family. A movie about how evil does not come from some foreign place, but is buried just beneath the surface. A movie which frequently evokes a sense of national identity in an ominous context, or whose images of leafless trees overlooking a modern suburb suggest that which has been destroyed to make way for American expansion. And the filmmakers must have been aware of these connections, given they went out of their way to stress the house was not built on an Indian burial ground.
It's not ancient tribal burial ground, it's just people.
Despite the many ways Poltergeist evokes a specifically American cultural context and critique, the filmmakers were careful not to be too overtly political. But Poltergeist didn't just modernize the content and themes of the haunted house movie, it also modernized the style. Traditional haunted house movies typically emphasized atmosphere over action. While the horror would eventually emerge in more intense set pieces, these were slow burn affairs that set up a mysterious and spooky tone, all while building empathy for the characters. Even The Exorcist, a special effects masterpiece renowned for its innovative set pieces, is largely a moody character piece, which subtly builds fear. Our astonishment at the filmmaking is dwarfed by the intensity of the emotional horror. I'm not saying Poltergeist doesn't have any build-up or subtlety. Scenes like the furniture being rearranged or the generally somber atmosphere once Carol Ann has been taken do evoke that classic, moody haunted house feel. But the film also jumps much more quickly into effects-heavy set pieces. Portals to other dimensions, ghostly apparitions floating through the house, evil trees smashing through the walls. This movie is a special effects extravaganza, not far removed from producer Steven Spielberg's science fiction movies. Hell, I might even argue that the abduction scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind is more terrifying than anything in Poltergeist. The film's visuals are certainly gruesome, but it's also a spectacle. I think my partner summed the overall effect up best when, as we were watching, she said, "This is really good, but it isn't scary." Now, this isn't intended to be an insult to Poltergeist. Though I do think the film played a role in horror movies gradually getting louder and less subtle in their scares, I also think the film brings its set pieces to life with creative flair. Whether it's the interdimensional portal in the closet or the literal skeletons in the backyard, these set pieces are a lot of fun. And that sense of fun is a big part of why the film is clear to pull its punches when it comes to any sort of political critique. Because no matter how fully the film plays on consumerist fears or gestures towards the horror beneath the soil of the American dream, Poltergeist is, fundamentally, still an entertainment. Poltergeist changed the haunted house movie in ways we can still tangibly see and feel. And yet, if we're talking about ghost stories from the 1980s, one title eclipses them all.